Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for agreeing to chat with me today. I really appreciate this. Um, Once we finish the recording, I'll send you a link to it. I ask you to review it to make sure neither one of us put our feet in our mouths. Better that instead of foot and mouth. Um, and then from that, you listen. You let me know if I can upload it. As I said to you earlier, many of the conversations in higher ed, EDUCAUSE posts them to their site, but if they don't, I always publish it to my YouTube channel, and then EDUCAUSE will go out there and look at a chat or something or a name that they're familiar with, and they'll say, "Oh, can we publish this?" And then if they do, they will send you an email asking you. They have their permission to publish it on the EDUCAUSE site. And I think if I remember, last close to 85,000 people see these that go on the EDUCAUSE site. So it does have a following, and the purpose of the chats really are to help people understand the journey from point A to point B.
Okay. I'm actually I'm not in higher ed. Is that okay for you?
It's okay, perfectly fine. I just wanted to make sure you knew, where they could go in all those parts, but yes, it's fine. Okay, so may I ask you to tell us your name?
Sure. My name is Jason Anklowitz.
Very, very nice. And Jason, will you please share a little bit about yourself? Your story. How did you come to where you are now? What were some of the challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them? And in your work to become Jason, are you done? Have you refined Jason to the point that you're doing everything you want to do and things are going well? So please.
Sure, thank you. So the path that I have been on started when I first got to college myself, and started comparing notes with some of my classmates and realized that my own experience up to that point did not stack up against that of many of my peers. And even as a young man with limited world experience, I was able to extrapolate out to recognize that if my middle class suburban public school education left something wanting the way that I saw that it did, then there are a lot of people in this country with much greater claim to that recognition than I had at that point. And so that's what set me off on a path in education. I started my career in the Washington, D.C. public schools, right as No Child Left Behind was coming into effect. And I very quickly realized in that environment that my hands were always going to be tied from doing what I knew was going to be best for my students, because we were always, it was all the talk was about teaching the program to fidelity and preparing for the test.
Yep.
And so from there, I found the private independent school world, where I had the flexibility and the autonomy to grow as an instructor, and to experiment. And that was really the first part of my career, was figuring out how to do that part of what I was doing the best I possibly could. I'm trained as a reading specialist, but I've only ever taught in a classroom environment, primarily in elementary grades. When I started to see then that what I was doing was effective in for the students that I had in front of me every single day, I started thinking about how then do I scale this? How do I move across classrooms? And so I started developing curricula and working with other teachers, and eventually how do I scale this across schools? And that led me toward a path where I spent a little more than 10 years running schools myself, and eventually ran into that same set of questions, where I started thinking about how to break beyond the limitations that I had being within a school, in a brick and mortar school environment. And so a few years ago, I left schools altogether and started taking on consulting roles to try to figure out exactly where my background and experience might be valuable, in areas that are still within education, but not in the spaces that I had been working, and found myself drifting very quickly toward education technology, for two reasons. And the first is that scalability is infinite. Once we figure out what works, we can be essentially everywhere, which is tremendously appealing to me. And secondly, because what I discovered pretty quickly is that the people who are building solutions for educational environments and the people who are using those solutions are rarely in contact. And when they are, there's a lot that gets left, that gets lost in translation, because there's no common frame of reference. I think it's really, really hard for educators to be able to step back from what they're doing every single day far enough to even understand what it is they need to articulate about what they're doing that's so challenging, to somebody who doesn't have that firsthand experience. And obviously without that firsthand experience, it's very, very difficult to contextualize what you're hearing from somebody, about what they're running into and what they're finding difficult. And so that's the conversation that I've been having, especially over the last 18 months, with entrepreneurs and younger companies to try to facilitate that conversation and to help them take what looks like a great idea and build something from that's going to be valuable in a school environment. Is that journey done? No, not even close. There's still a lot. There's a lot that I feel like I need to do, and to learn, and to continue along my own development before I'm going to be anywhere near done.
First, tell us, what do you do? What exactly do you do? You have your own company now, or what is the name of your company?
So the name, there's a couple aspects to my work. The extension. So what I started thinking about is how do I scale now the conversations that I'm having with companies in a way that's going to be efficient and still effective, and hopefully accelerate then the time that it takes to get those great ideas in front of students and teachers where they belong. And so my company Zippered is the platform that we're building in order to facilitate that conversation. Excellent. It really starts with a market analysis to be able to say, okay, here's what's available. Here's how teachers are responding to what's available to solve some challenge that they have. Then introducing something new and seeing how it compares. That's sort of the fundamental crux of the conversation. But we help companies to focus in very specifically on their target audiences and to identify what the challenges are that they need the most help overcoming, and then helping them to develop ideas into products that solve those problems. Excellent.
And so you are an online company, or do you have a brick and mortar location too?
No, it is virtual. My brick and mortar is behind me.
Very, very nice. And so what do you think is the biggest problem in elementary, specifically in education, elementary education?
Oh man, where to start? There's the problems that we're facing in education are the same ones that we've known about for decades, and are just really, really difficult to address. What we've seen over the course of since March 2020, the things that have been highlighted over the course of the pandemic have always been there. They've just been accentuated because of the particular set of circumstances that we've had during this time. But issues of equality, issues of access, those aren't new. We just see them in a different way when all of a sudden we're highlighting the fact that a full third of students never at any point during the pandemic had broadband access of any kind. I was working with an organization with a couple of middle schools in Brooklyn about a year ago, and even with hotspot devices, so many students lived in buildings where they couldn't get a signal. Yep. So we're completely cut off at a time when all of learning was meant to be done remotely. And I mean, those none of those challenges is new, but we're seeing it in a different way, and we hope that that emerging technologies are going to be part of the solution.
So how do you,
And
go
yeah,
ahead. No, if you finished your thought.
it's I mean, it's hard to, technology by itself is never going to do it. What we're seeing, I think what we see, what we are seeing is that those technological solutions need to be accompanied by people solutions, because that's what it comes down to in the end. So much of learning is fundamentally a social process, and every bit of extension from that unit of learning, in schools and systems and in the communities where we live and exist. It has to be about people, and yeah, none of it's new.
None of it's new.
We're not necessarily doing a better job of addressing it.
So let me ask you this. Across the entire education spectrum, people who've been in it for a while are often resistant to technology, right? Because they're used to standing in front of a whiteboard or a chalkboard and talking to their students and teaching and putting forth a learning that way. Have you found any challenges to getting educators to buy into technology? And I know we were forced to do so because of COVID, but have you found any resistance to technology and applying it in a traditional educational setting?
Absolutely, and you're right. The pandemic certainly accelerated a lot of that adoption, and just and people's willingness to try, or people were forced to try, and so hopefully made some progress there. But I don't know that it's necessarily different in terms of the resistance that you typically find to anything that's different or new. Invariably, that when we think of technology, it's just the application of what we've learned in science. And so you can think of it just as easily in terms of what is the most effective instructional strategy that we can deploy at a given time for a particular set of students to be most effective. There's just as much resistance in a school environment to changing the way that I, as a teacher, am going to approach my students, as there is to being online, or having to utilize a new technological tool. So maybe if you broke it down, the level of resistance isn't quite the same, or the rate at which it happens isn't quite the same. But I don't see those things differently necessarily. And I think that the only way to overcome it is by gradually showing the value. You've got to meet people where they are, and show them where it's successful, hopefully in the classroom next door, and work with them until they get there, just like that, just like any student and any learner in any environment. You've got to meet them where they are, and bring them along with the things that they need at the right time.
Absolutely. So one of the interesting pieces that technology has done for us and not done for us at the exact same time is introduce conveniences to us, right? So you don't have to have a landline in your home. You need some kind of smart device. You don't necessarily need a computer, but some smart device will allow you to navigate most of what technology has to offer, specifically information technology has to offer. So where do you see that going? Do you see that people are going to move more to more convenient technologies and convenient processes than what they have now? Or is it just one of those things where you evolve gradually, so you don't think, well, okay. And the reason why I asked that question is I work in IT, and what's really interesting about that is we are going to smaller and smaller because devices that small can hold a tremendous amount of data. Where when I started back in the 70s, mainframe computers took up 4 or 5 buildings to get that technology there. But now we're at this place where you can do most of what you do on your smartphone. How do you think that is going to evolve over time?
It's a great question, and I think that what we've seen is the ubiquity of technology in the rest of our lives makes it easier to accept that we have some form of technology in our work lives, whether that's in a school or anywhere else. And I think there is inherently greater resistance to some technologies in schools because that learning process is inherently social. And so those technologies sometimes have the effect of limiting that social interaction or even cutting it off in a way that's counterproductive. And so it has to be the right kind of technology to be able to facilitate what we know works well already in teaching and learning. But where the technology goes, I think in classrooms where because of that fundamental dynamic that we're never going to change, we have to move toward technologies that are going to facilitate that connection, and allow teachers to work regardless of their environment, allow teachers to work as though they had 8 arms, basically. Those are the kinds of technologies that we need to be facilitating and fostering and helping to grow. Especially right now, with the challenges the teachers are up against and just the rate of burnout right now. People are leaving education
At a high rate.
Yeah, I wasn't entirely convinced this time last year that was actually happening. And some of the interactions I have are skewed, but it does seem like that somewhere between 15 and 18% is the rate at which K-12 teachers were leaving the profession on an annual basis leading up to the pandemic. And it looks like it's more like 25, maybe even higher percent now. And
But the interesting thing about that is like, okay, so we've never paid teachers well, never. And I don't care what part of the country you're in, we've not paid teachers well. We don't respect what teachers do because so many teachers, and I hear this a lot from a lot of educators, they use their own money to buy supplies when the budget has been cut or there's not funding for everything that you need in a class. You come in early and you stay late, you got to grade papers, you got to do all of these things, lesson plans. And then you get to the end of the day and the people who are supposed to see that you are worthy do not. Your students do. Often students appreciate what teachers do, but it is rarely is it extrapolated out to the point where everybody else sees that. In higher education, our professor can make anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000 or $600,000 a year, whereas in elementary education, if you make $100,000 a year, you are knocking it out the park. You have just been there for a long time, and you're just winning awards after awards, but you're not really getting that compensation for the everyday hardworking teacher.
Right.
What does education need to reinforce to the larger society about the importance of teachers and paying them well and treating them well?
I mean, I think you just summed it up. There isn't a lot of in our country. There's not a lot of respect that goes along with the profession of education. And if I knew how to change that, I would have done it a long time ago. It's really hard because we've seen again and again when there's a budget shortfall, the very first thing that gets cut is education.
Absolutely.
The very first thing, because you can't go after the fire department, you can't go after the police, you can't go after the public works.
Healthcare.
Left is education.
Yep.
The only thing that's left is education.
Right.
So, and simultaneously, we point the finger at unions for being an incredible impediment to progress within education, which isn't untrue. But is it any wonder that we have unions focused a lot of times on just retaining their power when that's the situation where we have to expect that workloads are going to be increased, budgets are going to be cut, roles may not be, positions may not be safe.
And really the sad part of that is here in North Carolina, where I am, we were probably among the last states to get the lottery. And as soon as we got the lottery, the legislators began cutting the budget and substituting lottery funds into education. So the lottery now, it wasn't originally called that, but now it's called the North Carolina Educational Lottery. We don't have unions in the same way as you described, maybe up north, but there are places where, there's a teacher association or something like that supposed to look out the best interests of teachers, but really the legislators have trimmed back the power that educators have, in so many ways that it's almost, you can't expect people to want to go to get a degree, sit for an exam to certify you, and then recertify every so often, only to know that you're only going to make a certain amount of money. And in our society, it seems like to me, that at least from what I can tell, I've never worked in elementary education, so I want to make that perfectly clear. But the majority of students in public education are Black and brown, majority. And to me, there is a correlation between that demographic and the budget cuts and the lack of focus on education because of charter schools and other schools that have taken away their population. So kids, what we had back in the early days of white flight, you have that same thing in education, white flight in public school. So they go find other places to go to school so they don't have to put up with the interactions between Black and brown and other ethnicities, and also to make sure that they are getting the best education, because a lot of people consider public education substandard. How do we fix that?
Sure. Well, it certainly isn't uncommon for wealthy communities to have schools that are, by every measure, better than or better positioned to help students succeed than their counterparts in less affluent areas.
Yeah.
You raise a lot of interesting and important points there, but maybe the most important there is also the greatest challenge, possibly the greatest challenge that we face in education, and that's the fact that everywhere you go, education is viewed and addressed a little bit differently, because in our country, it is the single most local subject that you have. And we have, in addition to the 50 states, depending on where you are, like I know North Carolina is one of the states where it functions more at the state level. But if you go to a state like Connecticut, it is highly, highly local, down to the municipality. And so, implementing any sort of change at a widespread level is really, really difficult, not just nationwide, but even within some states.
Yeah.
I think ultimately that contributes to a lot of the challenges that we're addressing, because we can't even agree on how to do it.
Right. Because everybody has their own ideas. So we had No Child Left Behind, you mentioned earlier. We had Common Core, which I think we're still on the fringes of Common Core, but there are other kinds of educational, what I guess ideologies that people use to describe how we teach. And I think that, if you go back to some of the early philosophers, there was something said, and I don't remember who said this, but it's not like you're pouring something into an empty vessel. The person already has knowledge when they come to school, and then they go home and in their other communities, and they have knowledge that they gained there. And so finding a way to massage those two intersections into something, as opposed to thinking, the person that's standing in the front of the room is doing all of this to make the student better. And I remember there was an article from UPenn Wharton Business School that said the smartest person in the room is almost always the instructor. It's not the students, because they get to repeat this over and over again, whereas students are only exposed to this for a certain period of time, and then they moved on to another subject. And how do you reinforce that? Whereas the professor is teaching this over and over again, so he or she gets to be, really adept at teaching this. But one of the things that I think you said that really struck home with me was a social component of education. So we are becoming less social than we've ever been. There's so much divisiveness in this country, whether it's about vaccines or whatever it is that people seem to be up in arms about, they're there. So how do you bring the social piece of education together? And I'm sure there are technologies that can address this, but how do you do it in a way that reaches the majority as opposed to those on outliers?
Oh man, I mean, that's I just like anything else. I think it starts small. But we have we've eliminated a lot of opportunity in schools for students to engage with one another in a way that allows them to practice listening, and especially listening to somebody with whom they disagree.
Right.
And some of that is some of that's a sign of the times, just like you say. Some of it is due to cramming in many more topics than we did before, and having to race until the end of the year to cover everything that we need to with students. But I think some of it is just that we don't stop to prioritize or to reprioritize and to check in to make sure that the things that we're addressing are really the things that are most important for students to be talking about on a regular basis in their classes. So yeah, I mean, it's a huge problem. I don't know. Do we just get rid of all social media? That seems like it would help too. But we're dealing with all of the situations that we have, and I'm always somebody who thinks that whatever the issue, it has to start with asking what do we need to teach, and how do we get there? How do we get there through instruction? But I think it's about if kids don't have the opportunity to engage with one another on a level that promotes a civil discourse, then we can't expect to see it anywhere else.
Yeah. And the interesting piece about that, in reality, as we come to education for everything, right? So the great achievers in our society all started in the exact same place, elementary education. And then their paths diverge or merge in ways that are best for the economy. But it seems like that we forget how we got where we are. Like, we don't understand, the fundamentals of life. From elementary school, I didn't get my first college degree until I was in my 40s. And I did my doctor's, I completed my doctor's in 2016. There's not been a single thing that I've been taught in school that's relevant to what I do today. So we haven't taught kids about credit, how to manage money. You see these new online ads for, these new banking things to help kids learn about money. But really, that needs to be in a system where they are checks and balances, because these companies that are talking about giving kids credit and teaching them about money have a personal interest. But it needs to be in an unbiased, unfiltered place where instructors can help kids understand this and put it into practical use. So why hasn't education evolved to what we face in life? how to deal with mental health and social issues that exist with people, how to get your finances in order, what it means to be a self-starter or to be entrepreneurial, for lack of a better word. Why aren't we teaching kids these kinds of things as opposed to these traditional things? So like, I don't know if spelling is still in the education system, but you don't need to spell. Microsoft is going to spell for you, so they'll make sure you can spell. You don't need to know how to count. Excel is going to do that for you. So why aren't we teaching kids skills that they will be able to use in life and in possibly in a career?
I yeah, I
I'm
don't know.
sorry,
I
Jason.
don't know.
Yeah.
I think that if there's a silver lining to a lot of the things that we've seen over the last 18 months, it's that wellness, especially mental health, has been highlighted in a way that I didn't, and the recognition of which has been accelerated in a way that I don't know that we would have gotten otherwise. And so that at least is something of a movement in the right direction. But for the rest, I'm much more bullish on foundational skills. I mean, I think handwriting is important. I think that understanding the functions that Excel is going to perform for you is important, and because those are the skills that those are the things that, when built up, are the ones that teach us how to think. And it's much more because all these tools are going to be eventually doing a lot of that essential work for us. We need to teach our students how to apply what they're getting out of it to the situations that they're facing. So it's much more about application and interpretation than it is about keeping the books and accounting the way that it might have been in the past.
Why are those fundamental skills necessary when technology has stepped in and tried to do all of that for us? And again, I use myself, I'm a non-traditional student. I haven't written anything in years. I type on my computer, I speak into my phone, into a note or a Word document, and it just goes and fix all my spelling errors or grammar. Why are those fundamental skills still absolutely necessary to the application of education?
Well, I don't know that we get higher order math without a sense of numeracy at the most elementary level. Communication is still fundamentally important to everything that we do, more so even than it's been in the past, and that starts with reading and writing. And so, I understand. Certainly there are pieces that can be streamlined. Certainly there are pieces that we always want to be rethinking about. But I don't ever want to lose the pieces of our education, and that sort of traditional education, the way that we think about it, that are going to that are the stepping stones for that higher magnitude of interaction.
I understand. So tell me some more about your company. So what do listeners and people who may have an interest in connecting with you, what skills do they need to bring to the conversation, and what does it take to partner or engage with you?
We help companies to answer very fundamental questions. Who is this for? What do they need it for? And is this problem being solved by what I'm giving them? And so, those are the questions that the companies we're working with are asking. And so you don't need more than that to come to the table. We work with a range of early stage companies, some with tens of thousands of users already, but are still trying to find their footing. as well as companies that are very much in the pre-revenue, pre-product stages. But they fundamentally have that set of questions, that set of really, really basic questions at their center, connecting them. However we've gotten to the point that we're not quite sure how to answer these questions so that we can continue to grow, to scale in the way that we would like.
Okay, thank you for that. I really appreciate you taking this time to talk with me. And I want to give you an opportunity to say or cover anything that we did not cover in our discussion. Is there something else you'd like to contribute?
No, that you covered a lot of ground. I feel like that was great. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the invitation. I enjoyed that. You kept me on my toes the whole way through.
Thank you for that. All right. If I have your permission, I'd like to connect you to someone who may need your services, but also may be a good partner for you. So if that's okay with you, I will now talk to you about this offline, and you can let me know if you want me to connect you to that
please.
group.
Absolutely.
And then in the end, so we are talking about Jason and your successes in your career. So you said earlier you were not done. You still are in the process of evolving in your work and in yourself. So what would you say has been the greatest challenge for you to date? And how do others manage that same issue if they have it?
That's a great question. I don't, I think that people that people my story resonates with the most, people that I make the strongest connections with, have a similar background in the sense that we never know exactly where we're going to end up, but we know we're going to get there because we've been knocked down enough and picked ourselves up and moved forward and figured out how to do it along the way enough times to know that that whatever comes our way, we're going to figure it out. Yeah. And I've had tremendous fortune, for which I'm incredibly grateful all the way through. But it's also required diligence and resilience. And so I don't know where it's going to go next. I know that the biggest challenge recently the biggest challenge that I faced was leaving a 20-year career in education. For a lot of, for a lot of the reasons that we were talking about earlier, it was challenging with, quote unquote, only school experience to find my footing in another area and to gain credibility in another area. So, and I know that for a lot of the teachers that are looking at whether or not they can, trying to gauge how much they can handle before they also decide to move on to something else. They're running into something very similar, and it takes time, it takes trial and error. It took me going down several paths that were the wrong ones first. But more than anything else, you have to know that ultimately what you're pursuing is the right thing, and that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. That's what drives me is figuring out then what I've done up to this point is going to be helpful for that next thing coming forward.
Absolutely. I often tell people fail and fail often, because that's how you get to the next place. You have to fail, and people have an aversion to failure, but without failure, you don't have success. Riding a bicycle, learning to walk, anything that we learn, we fall often. We get back up and we keep plowing through. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate that in you. And thank you so much again for chatting with me. I will send you a link
Yeah,
once
thank
this
you.
conversation converts. And please review it and let me know if I may upload it.
Absolutely. Will do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate this. Thank you. You have a
Yeah,
great rest of your day and stay well.
you as well. Thank you. Thanks, Rochelle.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye now.